Actually, these are the dwarf tapeworm is actually the most common tapeworm in the world. Now, these are, once again, very, very common symptoms. Now, I don't have a picture of a tapeworm, but I have definitely counseled people with them. I had one lady that was in her 60s, and just tell you very quickly, and grew up in a country. She was from another country, but they ate beef all the time. I mean, that was just, a daily staple because it's what they grew up with, and they raised cows. And she came in, she was in her 60s, and she looked about 9 months pregnant. I mean, really out to here, and her abdomen was very, very hard, but the rest of her body was like a toothpick, just skinny, and she was so yellow. I mean, she was completely jaundiced. Anyway, long and short of it, she had heard me talk on TV about parasites, and she said, oh, I know, she's like, I have all those symptoms, I know exactly what's wrong. She came in to see me, and honestly, this woman started passing this parasite. I still think of it and just kind of get grossed out, but it started coming out a few inches at a time of this tapeworm and just breaking off. And at one point, she somehow measured, most people get little fish nets like you use for an aquarium, and that's how I get my little samples. They fish them out. But I think one segment that broke off was about 18 inches long. So once again, these are very, very common. I talk a lot about flukes and so forth. Let me show you some of my little flukes that people have sent in, okay? These are fish flukes. They actually come from fish. This particular one has a very hard shell. It almost looks like a little baby crab, a little fiddler crab growing up in Florida. It's pretty nasty stuff there. Now, I actually have a jar of these guys, and this person actually passed a few. And that's another thing that we need to realize, that if there's one, there's more. You're not typically going to pass one large parasite and not have more waiting. So these are pretty ugly guys. Here's another fluke, a different type, and there are various flukes that come from various types of fish. I don't eat raw fish. I'm not into sushi, but I have passed lots of flukes. And I know it's because I grew up fishing. I always eat lots of fish, and even though it's cooked good, I mean, there's just different issues with it. And as I've said before, in pork, you actually have to heat it to over 500 degrees to even kill the eggs in the pork. So this one is another type of a fluke that typically comes from fish. It's another picture of some others that people have sent in. This one looked kind of like shredded shrimp. And this is definitely another type of fluke. Pretty nasty stuff. This is a type of fluke. It's a smaller version, kind of furry looking. This person, there's actually quite a few in here. And once again, as I said, if you've got one, you've got more. They're not just going to be traveling alone. Then I want to take you to Giardia, which is pretty nasty. This person actually has a little roundworm in here as well. And these look like black-eyed peas with fur, for sure. Hopefully you can get a good look at that. And I actually had one man that came in to see me. This was a few years ago. He had seen me on television talking about parasites and recognized all the symptoms and came in and said, I have all of those symptoms. I was actually diagnosed with this issue several years ago, 15 years ago. 2 of my children are medical doctors, okay? And he had told them ever since he'd been diagnosed with these parasites that he had not felt the same, that he just didn't feel well, he didn't know what was wrong with him, but that he had had these same symptoms ever since. So he actually then, said, hey, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to get that cleanse, and he actually lived close by. He started, 2 weeks later, he came in, and he brought in a big jar full of these parasites that look like black-eyed peas with fur. And this was the exact same parasite. He'd actually been looking it up on different websites. So this is the same parasite that he had been diagnosed with 15 years ago. Well, most of the medications, if you are diagnosed, in a doctor's office or in a hospital, whatever, he had been hospitalized. yes, it will treat the living parasites at that time. But these, as I've shared with you already about the roundworms laying eggs daily, most parasites lay worms every 30 days. And let me add to that so many times people are sicker around a full moon and grumpier and everything else, because that's typically when parasites are hatching, is during that time frame. I know it's gross. I know it's disgusting, but think about it. How many people are grumpy? You know, sometimes you just don't want to answer the phone on a full moon. But it's absolutely true that they're hatching every 30 days. People get more irritable. They're itchy. They're achy. They're hurting. All of these different problems. Anyway, so this particular man started passing all these, you know, this big old jar full of parasites, and I said, wow, I can't believe that's huge. I cannot believe you passed all those at one time. And he said, oh, that's nothing. He said, once they started coming out, he said, this is just a small sample of what actually came out of me. So this man, for 15 years, had these just multiplying and multiplying and multiplying within his body. 2 of his children doctors, and nothing being done. And he'd gone to other doctors, and it's basically like, well, it's in your head. Well, you are getting older. You know, you hear all kinds of things. Well, it's not in your head. It's most likely in your intestines. You know, something's going on down there, and it just isn't right. In fact, another story, you know, I wasn't around during this time, but in World War II, there were actually soldiers that had been diagnosed with a type of parasite in Europe, and they were treated, okay, for this particular parasite. Many of them were still sick, and they were checked. They were followed. This parasite was, and I don't remember the name of it, but it was a bad guy. And they were followed and studied, and 30 years later, 30% of those men from World War II that had this parasite actually still had it. 30% of those men, 30 years later. Because you can't just kill off the mama. I mean, you got to kill off everything. You can't just kill off the adult parasite. So if you get a big old worm out, you can guarantee that there's more. Now, most parasites are microscopic. Okay, most of them are going to be so small, because I've had people, well, how do I find it? Do I need to look for it? That scares me. And I just say, hey, flush and run. You don't need, if you want to search through, if you want to go digging for it, hey, go for it. It's okay. You know, just like in the privacy of your own home, get one of those little fish nets. But if you don't, flush and run. People have told me that they simply just start feeling better, that maybe they never saw anything, but they start feeling better. And that, you know, as I said, the reason that I tell people, hey, when you start cleansing, then make sure you do it for 60 to 90 days, because you want to kill off the babies that are being hatched out. And my kids have all passed them. I've passed them. My animals, everything. I can remember one of my children many, many years ago, and you know, in a neighborhood. This time I was still living in South Carolina, and they were outside playing with a neighbor friend. And this neighbor had a, you know, sweet house cat. And while they're outside playing and on the sidewalk, this cat kind of starts coughing, and out comes shooting this big worm out of this cat's mouth. And it was alive still, and went out, and then it shot back in their mouth. Yeah, it totally freaked them out. Hey, I hope you've learned something today about parasites and what might be eating you. I didn't even scratch the surface on all the informations and symptoms and disorders and various things that could be going on in your body, and could be the problem, the root problem of issues that you might be facing. So I hope that you'll get some more information. I hope you'll look at doing a cleanse, and if you haven't done one in over a year, then hey, do it again, and do everybody at the same time. Get the bad stuff out, start putting the good stuff in. Don't let any critters or anything else be eating your goods, eating your nutrients. God wants you healthy. He wants you whole, He wants you healed, and He wants you well, so you can do what you're called to do here on the earth today. And the best way to do it is if you're healthy and you're feeling good, you feel like doing it. Hey, I'm going to see you next week. Thanks for watching me, Valerie Saxon, on Alternative Health on your TBN network. I hope you've learned something today about parasites, worms, critters, those things that might be crawling within and eating your lunch or eating you for lunch. Hey, if you want more information, please give us a call at 1-800 493-1146 or simply go to the website valeriesaxon.com.